thank you to all of you for being here. I wanted to congratulate all of the signatories, the central bank, the various ministries involved with the launch of the We Finance Code. It's been just really exciting to see the level of commitment and the broad base of support for the code here in Rwanda. I run the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, and we were delighted just about 18 months ago to launch the code at the World Bank IMF annual meetings in Marrakesh. Since then, it's been really astounding to see the progress that we've made around the world. We have nearly 30 countries that are joining the code, that have either signed on to the code or are planning to sign on to the code. We have at least 10 countries in Africa that either have signed the code or will be joining the code. And I think there's maybe 5 or 6 additional countries in the room in Africa who are, we hope, candidates to join the code in the coming months because we see this as a growing movement. Across the world, we have over 250 financial institutions. Well, I should say 260, over 260 financial institutions after today's signing that have become part of this movement to make commitments to close financing gaps for women entrepreneurs. And as you've heard today, there's really 3 pillars to those commitments. The first 2 are what I call the enablers, and that's the champions, many of whom you see in the room, both from Rwanda and from around the world, and who we have on stage here with us today, who are really leading the charge for their institutions and for their countries to make sure that the code moves forward and that their institutions are committing the resources and attention to closing these finance gaps. We've heard a lot also about the data commitment, and between the champions and the data, those are really the essential enablers that bring the code together. But what really is important is those commitments to action. I think we heard from the previous panel, that's really where the movement will happen for women entrepreneurs, the new products, the new services, the new frees who are here to share their experiences, being a few months ahead in the launch of the We Finance Code, or maybe even more than a few months in some cases. And we are delighted to have them. They've been able to share their experiences in other fora as well. And so I've had a chance to learn a lot from them about what they're doing in their countries and how they're moving forward. So with no further ado, let me jump into some questions so that they can share those experiences. And I'm going to begin with Dalma Hernandez. She's the manager, as you've heard, for social banking at the Bankers Association of Dominican Republic. And the Dominican Republic was the first country to launch the We Finance Code, also at a Financial Alliance for Women Summit. And I was just there last week for another event where we were talking to bankers associations from around Latin America about joining the code. So they've really made incredible progress and are becoming an advocate around the region for more countries to learn from them and to join the code as well. So Dalma, if you could tell us a little bit about why you joined the code and what has been the impact on the code in Dominican Republic.
Well, first I would like to thank you, Wendy and Anna and the whole team for inviting us. This is really a game changing for us to be part of this kind of scenarios where really change can be possible. So starting from the Dominican Republic model, basically we work hard to create strategic and systemic actions that drive formalization, but also increase financial inclusion. So we have many, but some of them are that we work on a scheme to enable MSMEs to pay their taxes by credit and debit card. We actually made an agreement with issuers, with acquirers, and the government to make it possible. And we also did a legislative push for a simplified tax scheme. We call it monotributo in Spanish. That is basically for one monthly payment, you have Social Security, you have health insurance, you have labor risk. To simplify the tax scheme and also increase formalization. We also have incentive to expand credit guarantees, basically making the eligibility criteria more simplified, and also the collateral are not so for the MSMEs not so strict. And we're working on a national survey in the major cities in the country, but really for the micro enterprises to know their financial challenges, digital gaps, and really map our population characteristics and challenges. And well, I don't want to bore you with so many actions, but also we have a guarantee fund that the banks already got in with 50% of credit risk, where it will be destined to MSMEs and social housing. So We Finance Code actually open a broad of actions on the MSMEs ecosystem in our country.
So let me just follow up with a question on that. The code in Dominican Republic, I think one of the differentiating factors is that the Bankers Association is really central to the code in Dominican Republic. In many countries, the Bankers Association, fintech associations, venture capital associations are involved. But in Dominican Republic, really, the Bankers Association is leading with the support of the superintendencia. So could you talk a little bit about how your role, the role of the regulator, and then how that has facilitated these important actions that are coming out of the code?
Okay, so what Wendy is saying is that, and it's basically true, our banker association is a little bit different from some of others in our region. Basically, the first thing our president did was when she started was signing an agreement with the Fintechs Association, and we laughed because the president said, "Okay, the Fintechs supposedly are our not enemies, but." Competitors, and and she said no, we have to seek alliance. So I do this story because it's how we have been working. Basically, we have a really good relationship with our regulators. She was everyone in the Bankers Association, all the employees were once part of the government, but also our president was assessed. They bring something new for the code. They bring something new for the code. They bring something that can allow us to make the code sustainable over time.
Great, thank you so much. Let me turn now to Temitope, who's been leading the work in Nigeria as the head of the Financial Inclusion Delivery Unit at the Central Bank of Nigeria. And Nigeria was one of the first countries in Africa to launch the code. And I remember being amazed. I had tried to get to the launch and I wasn't able to make it. And it was so exciting to see they had 60 institutions signing the code at their launch event. And I thought that was amazing. And then a few weeks later, they wrote to me and said, now we have 90 institutions that have signed on to the code. So I hope that we'll see here in Rwanda also the continued inclusion of new financial institutions, as we've seen in Nigeria. And Temitope, if you could share, this much more of a central bank-driven activity in Nigeria. And if you could share what is the strategic importance of the code for the Central Bank of Nigeria and for Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Wendy. So Rwanda has joined the League of Nations, as I like to call it, that have committed to this global code to advance access to finance for women. So for Nigeria, now turning to my beloved country, this was a natural alignment, as we like to put it. Now, why was this important for us? For the last decade in Nigeria, we've had the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, which is really our blueprint for promoting access to finance for the country. Now, over the period of time that we've implemented the strategy, and then we've also done our assessment in terms of the progress we're making and the kind of development that we are seeing in the ecosystem, we continue to see that women, were lagging behind in terms of access to finance. There has been a persistent 9% gender gap. So because of that gap, we decided we needed to prioritize access to finance for women. So that was the very first thing that we landed upon. Make it a priority, because you cannot leave half of the population behind and say you're doing inclusion. That is not inclusion. Inclusion is about bringing everybody to the table, and letting them have a part. So priority segment for us is women in Nigeria. The second reason why that was important was that we decided we needed a very cohesive approach in driving access to finance for women. So a few years back, in fact, during the COVID-19 in 2020, we launched the framework for advancing women's financial inclusion in Nigeria. And in that framework, we highlighted 8 strategic imperatives. I won't bore you with the details, but within those 8 strategic imperatives, natural alignment was around leadership, action, and gender disaggregated data. So when we started the conversation with our development partner, the World Bank, there was a natural fit for the organization to commit to this code. Now, moving from the commitment, what did we do as a country? We decided that we wanted the private sector to take the lead. Like my counterpart from the Bank of Rwanda spoke this morning, we don't give loans to anybody. So our role is really an enabling role. It's about the enabling environment, it's about the policy, and then shaping the practices. So what we did, and Wendy spoke about it now when we launched last year, we decided we wanted to launch with 2 private sector leaders. And we launched with 2 of our banks, the Development Bank of Nigeria, I think they're also in the room, our co-champion, and the Bank of Industry. Because we felt we needed the code to have a face that's private sector. And then the regulator is in that mix as a co-champion, providing the policy support, providing the galvanizing and the convening power of bringing regulators to the bringing stakeholders to the table. So that was our story in Nigeria. So we did the public declaration of commitment came first. We had an event in October where the signatories, like we witnessed this morning, signed, committed, and said, I pledge to do this. And then in November, we galvanized our network and said, come join the code. As we speak today, we have over 90 signatories in Nigeria. About 1/3 of them are in the room this morning, actually. Thank you very much. And we are very excited because we are seeing the kind of change we hope to see. So we have regulators, not just the Central Bank of Nigeria. We have other services regulator as well. The insurance regulator is a signatory. The pension regulator is a signatory. We are talking to all the other partners in the room. So regulators, service providers, development partners, and civil society is a national coalition we are building in Nigeria, all committed to the code.
Thank you. And one of the things that's been really impressive in Nigeria is the data dashboard as well, which I think is publicly accessible if people want to look at it. It's been an amazing tool. And I think expanding it to cover SMEs and enterprise data is also kind of a critical focus going forward. So maybe you have something to say about that.
I'm very glad to speak to that. So one key thing we did as part of our launch for the code was to also release what we call the Women's Financial Inclusion Dashboard, the data dashboard. And that board for us is a single source of truth. Now, what did we do as a country? We started out by, of course, manual collection of data, the statutory returns from the institutions. And then we said we wanted the data to be more granular and, of course, disaggregated. So we are working with 3 data sources that gives us that overview in terms of the women access to finance, the women markets in Nigeria. One of the data sources comes from within the central bank itself, and that's the credit data. So we have what we call the CRMS. The CRMS is short for the Credit Risk Management System. So using a unique code that shows identifier by gender, we are able to disaggregate and say, this is the proportion of women businesses that have access to loans. That's one data source. The second data source is from the national aggregator, the central switch, the Nigerian Interbank Settlement System, and we're actually working on 2 databases within the central switch. One is what we call the ICAD. We love acronyms. ICAD is the industry customer account database. And from that database, we're able to pull across the banking sector, the account information, and essentially, and Very critical to us is also confidentiality and data privacy. So the data that you find on the dashboard is anonymized. It doesn't go down to the persons, it's granular data, but it's very anonymized. So we can uniquely say these are the kind of accounts, these are the kind of services that people are enjoying. And then the third part of that is the transactional data. Transactional data to the extent that we can disaggregate to say what proportion of women are using the ATM channel, what proportion of them are using cards, and we're adding on a couple of other indicators in that dashboard. So we started out with a static launch. I'll say a static launch because we pulled historic data. But we are moving on now to the second phase of implementation, whereby we want this to be real-time, online, real-time, fully. And very recently, matter of fact, we had a national coalition workshop just last month, and we actually released a new addition to that dashboard, which is the sole proprietorship dashboard. So as of now, we can uniquely say these are the sole proprietors in Nigeria, women that have access to finance. We spent a bit of time working with our project consultants, Consumer Centrics. They've been very supportive on this project, and with the support of the World Bank. So we've been able to sort of disaggregate the account information that we have to uniquely show the access to finance to markets. Now, let me end by just talking about the value proposition. For us as a regulator, it gives us a 360-degree view of the women's market. For our service providers, it gives them a sense of the market. Because you know your portfolio, and then you see the global portfolio, what are people accessing, and then it tells you where you need to do more. Either in the loans size, either in of course, the number of loans, and the disaggregation is not just by gender, it's also by geography. So you can dimension the data to say what portion of the country am I serving? Where am I not serving? It is quite granular. So value proposition is quite given. For us, it's policy instruments, to push the indices and see how we can see better performance. And for the market, it is actual market intelligence that it can work with. Okay.
Great, thank you so much. That's really part of the lessons we're trying to share across the network of code countries, and peer learning is such an important part of what we're doing, and also developing tools so that what's innovated in one country, we can accelerate the adoption in other countries and adapt it to the unique needs of different countries. So we're trying to make sure that we speed up the learning process. Khaled, you have been a supporter of the We Finance Code, and Egypt has been an early adopter. So you've done a lot of work on the data side, and I wanted to let you share some of the experiences you have with introducing the data and the code in Egypt.
Thank you, Wendy. First, I would like to congratulate Rwanda on the coalition signage and the commitment to the code, and to thank them very much for organizing this great event, an important event. Since some good time, Egypt had been working on data for financial inclusion and for MSMEs, which is one of the most important pillars within the financial inclusion strategy, boosting the ecosystem of MSMEs. Having said that, we have to recognize that women in Egypt represent 49% of the total population, which means that they are half of the society. And mostly, when they come to business, they work into the informal system much more than the formal system. And that was a challenge to the central bank on how to bring those MSMEs, whether formal or informal, towards the formal system. And having to start with that, we needed to have several bases on the ground. And I always love the word that you have started with in your introduction, enabling, because this is a major role of any regulator, is to enable the society and to enable the FSPs in working towards their strategy. So the first ever thing we started with is basically gathering data on gender desegregated data. And that was through our national ID unique identifier, which desegregates male and female within the national ID number. So we started with that, and we started having the banks to gather data based on gender desegregated and to report it back to the Central Bank of Egypt. But that was not enough. We had to also enable other things for the FSPs, as such as the definition for MSMEs. Banks did not have a unified definition for that, and each and every bank within Egypt had its own definition for MSMEs. So we had to unify what to report on. So we had the definition of MSMEs unified between the banks, and after which we have also came up with the definition of woman-owned business and woman-led business. And those two important definitions helped the banks and the central banks to collect data based on a unified definition and to see classified number of sets of data that were important to us and to the FSPs for further development and analysis to the data that they provide. The challenge that we have at the moment is within the data that are gathered and collected are only for the borrowers' data and not for the depositors. So we're working at the moment with the banks and with our consultant Consumer Centrics on how to bring also the depositors side of that MSMEs. With this, it will be a very comprehensive outlook to the market, and it will benefit the FSPs to further develop consumer-centric products that would be able to provide more access to finance to women MSMEs. Thank you.
Great. And Khaled has brought up a really important point, which is probably the starting point for many countries introducing the code, is coming up with a national definition. And there's good practices. We have a note up about good practices in this, but every country has its unique nuances. And one of the things we've also developed is a data mapping tool, because you not only need to look at what the general definition is, but how definitions are being applied in different institutions around the financial system. Our not only banks and microfinance institutions, but our credit bureaus looking at data, our guarantee agencies looking at data. So really mapping where the data flows are, how definitions are being used across the ecosystem are really important. And then making sure that the financial institutions are aligned with that reporting. We also are working with OECD, which will be aggregating data from all of the national code partners so that we can have a global snapshot of this. And the idea is to help provide insights that span across countries and across different types of financial institutions. So that will be a very important element as well. I wanted to turn to the next question, and I'll start with you, Khaled, which is about the policy reforms and what are the types of policy interventions that are happening in Egypt that you see have already had an impact or that you expect to have an impact on how finance is delivered to women entrepreneurs in the market?
As we have already introduced within the first question, that the regulators is a major enabler. Mm-hmm. And part of that is policy making. And also we've mentioned that 50% of the population in Egypt is female, and mostly they work into the informal system. So how can we bring this informal system into the formal system and benefit from the formal benefits that the banks can provide? So for that, we came up with the what's so-called economic activity account regulations, which is a breakthrough. That is an account that is open for the informal sector, and it is with no commercial registry documents or any documents. They just open those kind of accounts where their national ID, where they have, at the end of the day, caps for the transactions that are made on this kind of an account. That account in itself, since the induction of the regulations, have been able to bring in 440,000 accounts only for economic activity account. And that shows and we're still in the very early stages of the regulations. So we're expecting much, much more than that, but it shows the impact of such regulations on the formal system and on the informal system, and what are the ways and means that can bring in the informal system towards the formal system. So that was one major thing, an activity that we have done. Also, the simplified KYC was introduced as part of our financial inclusion efforts. And also, they opened the bank accounts only with their national ID. On the MSME side, it was important to bring in much more mandates on the banks. So we have mandated 25% of the credit portfolio of each and every bank to be directed towards MSMEs. And that was important, and that was after we have tried to incentivize the banks by reducing 25% of the reserves at the central bank when they provide MSMEs, but they did not bring the impact that we wanted on. So it's always important to try the carrot and the stick. So by mandating the 25%, it brought the impact, and nowadays most of the banks in Egypt are providing those, and they are complying with the 25% of their credit portfolios directed towards the MSMEs. Also, we have extended the support of the banks to finance the microfinance institutions. And within Egypt, the microfinance institution is very important in lending women in Egypt. So 70% of the beneficiaries of microfinance in Egypt are women. So the banks are also providing and extending access to finance to microfinance loan, which increased from 10 billion Egyptian pounds to nowadays to 50 billion Egyptian pounds directed towards microfinance in Egypt. Those were the major kind of regulations that we came up with, in addition to the preferential interest rates provided to the MSMEs, which was at 5%, and it was directed from the Central Bank of Egypt, and nowadays it's funded from the Ministry of Finance.
Great. So much to chew on there. Amazing progress and also innovations on the policy side that I think everybody can learn from. I just wanted to highlight the work on informal. The code is really meant to increase focus on entrepreneurship, enterprise development, but really at every level. So the informal sector as well as the formal sector is really important to try to stimulate and to try to move, and I think this was the point about from DR, try to move informal firms into the formal sector as well, create incentives for that latter. And I also just wanted to commend you for the process you've gone through in terms of creating incentives and then a mandate on how much of the balance sheet should go to SMEs. And I think that's an important way. We heard earlier today about building bridges between different types of financial institutions that some might be able to provide capital and others can actually have the retail networks on the ground to deploy that. So these are really important things to think through. Timotopik, can you share some policy innovations that have happened in Nigeria that might be helpful for this audience?
I think I would like to talk about one in particular, because we do some of the measures that Egypt has spoken about as well. So I'll emphasize more around what we're trying to do on the agent network. Now, within the strategic imperatives I talked about earlier on our strategy for advancing women's financial inclusion, one of the key things we saw when we did that landscape study is that financial service providers sometimes have this challenge of reaching the women's market because of the channels of access that are insufficient in terms of reaching them. So one imperative that we really focus on is serving women close to home. Financial services close to home. So leveraging on that point, we came out with a strategy for using the agent network to serve the women market. Now, what we are trying to do is to be very intentional in this regard. And the chief executive of one of our key institutions in this regard is also in the room this morning. So we have a shared agent network facility ecosystem that basically deploys agent points across the country. Now, we know that access points sometimes could be a challenge when you're trying to reach women through financial points that are physical, because they're often in their businesses. They're not going to leave their shops or their market to go to the bank because they're going to lose time. They're going to lose, commercial activity. So agent network is very critical. So one key thing that we are pushing out in the network is to sort of improve the ratio. I think currently now is about 20% of the network, but we are saying we want this to be an even split. So we are saying to the network, in your agent recruitment strategy, be very intentional. We want female agents, and we want them close to points of businesses, because we don't want women losing out on valuable commercial time, to go sit at the bank, and do the transaction. We want services that can come to them, So that is one key area that I would like to highlight. The other one I would like to talk about as well. I won't really say policy, because we are not sort of using a policy instrument to enforce. So we are coming from an advocacy perspective. Now, when we did the National Coalition, workshop, one key takeaway from that session was we wanted our signatories, all 90 plus of them, to be self-directed and committed to the objectives they've declared for the code. So every signatory has committed to two measures. One is quantitative, the other is one is financial, the other is non-financial. So what we've said to them, and a number of them have responded to this, and we are collating and working out the KPIs and the measurements. We're saying for every signatory, we want clear action statements. Your action statements, over and above all that you do as an institution to promote the women's markets, give us your top 5 that will directly drive funding to women on one hand, and on the other hand, your non-financial measures, be it literacy, be it business development services, be it sensitization, be it trust building engagement. Give us those top 5. So that is one thing we are moving with in Nigeria. Every signatory today is making that declaration. And at the workshop, we defined the KPIs because we want to be able to measure across the country. Now, we are coming up 6 months. We launched officially in November. So we are midpoint of the first year, actually. Midpoint of the first year. So by November, we are looking forward to actually producing our country report for the first year. And one thing we'll look to spotlight in that country report is to spotlight our signatories, to say on the financial side, these are the numbers. This is what they committed to, this is where we've gone. On the non-financial side, these are our commitments, and this is how far we've come. But for that, is more of advocacy, and then we'll continue to collaborate.
Thank you. That's great, and so important to make sure that onboarding process is really structured to include targets and milestones so that you can really measure progress. Of course, the data will also show whether the numbers are moving in terms of the volume and numbers of loans or other financing instruments, but having those key milestones and those key action items and targets is really, really essential. Dalma, any thoughts on the policy side from your perspective?
Well, yes, on the policy side, I think is the most important part of the code because it can actually ensure the sustainability of these actions over time. From our side, I said most of them at the beginning, but for us, it's really about the coalition. We heard about the code from our anchor bank, Bank BHD, and they are the leading commercial bank in our country that works with women MSMEs. So from that side, we said yes, we were the first country to sign the code, and just as Rwanda, we had the presence of our president, and that high-level presence really sent a message about the importance of the code in the country. So after that, our coalition made it possible. Wendy was saying before a characteristic about our coalition, because we are a banker association, so to ensure the sustainability of the code, we actually made a scheme with the Superintendency of Banks where the Banker Association is the coordinator and the aggregator of the Wi-Fi code. So what we did is that the banks send the data to the Superintendency of Banks. They do the whole anonymization process, and then they send it to us. So that's the side of the banks. So with the side of the fintechs, because we also have fintechs that are part of the code, we are working on, we did the API. So the same API, we send it to the fintechs associations. The fintechs send the information, they do the anonymization process, and they send it to us. So everything will be on those dashboards that hopefully are as good as Nigeria's and the one that Rwanda presented. So, and we are also working along with consumer centric. So it's basically it's more about, as my colleagues were saying, about coordination, about creating actions, about not looking just how to disaggregate the data and that's it, but looking ahead of that and what we're going to do with that data and how is this going to work over time when the WIFI code finish. What do we want our country to become? What do we want our MSMEs to look like? So it's more than just the code. It's a whole national goal to really see us growth.
Thank you. And I think we're coming close on time. So I think I'll try to wrap up and summarize some of I can't really summarize. What I can say is what we've heard here is dozens of ideas of things that can be implemented in countries to really close financing gaps. And this is really just the beginning of the journey. What we're looking forward to seeing more and more is those solutions that the financial institutions are coming up with that are getting new funding out or bringing new women entrepreneurs into the pipeline of the banks to support them. But the beauty of the code, as I've mentioned, is that coalition building and the ability to come together and say, here's what the constraints are, here's what the challenges are. How do we as a community solve them? How do we work with the associations, the financial institutions, and the policymakers to really address those problems? And what we try to do to help is we work with our global partners as well, our implementing partners who you're working with, the multilateral development banks, as well as supporters like the Gates Foundation or the UNEP FI, Women's World Banking, others who are global partners with us, and Financial Alliance for Women, of course, OECD, to really bring tools and support into these structures so that we can learn and accelerate your learning paths on these areas. So we'll continue this discussion on Friday when we have a whole day dedicated to the code. We'll be sharing a lot more about these tools and hearing from more countries that have been adopting the code and financial institutions about what they're doing on the code. And so I hope many of you will be there for that discussion, and that we'll have many more countries who are in the room joining us, because I know there's interest out there, and this is really a global movement. To quote the First Lady, we are rocking the boat. We want to continue rocking the boat for good and to empower more women with access to finance. So let me thank our panelists for all of your insights and for sharing so generously your experiences and your innovations. And we'll look forward to continuing to work with you and hear from you about those innovations as we go forward. Thank you.